are live.
We all set? We have everybody we need? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We missing somebody?
Amy is here. We're still working on her Zoom link.
Okay, should I begin?
We can go ahead.
All right. So, good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome you all to the Lake Bluff District 65 Committee of the Whole meeting from May 11th, 2021. Our board members and members of the district's administrative team are participating in a hybrid meeting as there is currently a requirement on group sizes in an effort to limit the spread of COVID-19. As a public body, the Lake Bluff Board of Education is subject to the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Prior to this meeting, a public announcement was posted on our website announcing various participation options, including asking questions ahead of the meeting using a Google form. In addition, community members can comment live during the public comment period if they're viewing on Zoom by using the raise your hand feature. While the requirements of the Open Meeting Act have been relaxed during the global pandemic, the members of the Board of Education take their responsibilities as board members who are responsible to the public no less seriously. So our new secretary, Ann Hill, could you please call the roll?
I will. I forgot to, Mark. All right, Mark Berry.
Present.
Andy Duran.
Present.
Ann Hill, present. Amy Connell Donahue. Present. Lauren Hirsch. Present. Tim Penich.
Present.
Carrie Steinbach.
Here.
We've got a quorum. We can begin. So we start every meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you guys who are there in the flag, please stand and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will open up for public comment. If there is anybody watching on Zoom who would like to make a public comment, all you need to do is raise your hand. There's a raise your hand feature on Zoom, and we will call on you. If there is written public comment, the board secretary will let me know and we will read it, but I'm not sure that there is.
There's no public comment written and
Okay.
no one with their hands raised right
I
now.
see no hands raised at this time. If you're watching and you want to make a public comment at the end of the meeting, we will also have public comment period at the end. At this time, as we do in every board meeting, we offer the opportunity for board members to offer a suggestion for a future agenda item to be considered by the administration. So if anybody has anything they would think that is important that we need to be discussing, please raise that. You can raise that now, or if an idea occurs to you later, don't ever hesitate to reach out, email or text myself or Dr. Leali with ideas for future agenda items. Also at this time, we offer the opportunity for a brief discussion. If there's something that comes up that somebody thinks that the board needs to know about, we can discuss it briefly at this time, although no action is allowed because it was not on the agenda. So if anybody wants to say something or raise an idea for an agenda item, please do so now. Otherwise, we'll move along to our discussion items and presentation items. Item 6A is an end of the year activities discussion. Dr. Leali is going to take us through that, I believe.
Yeah, this is going to be fairly brief, but we've got an audio issue. 1 second. Are we muted? Can you hear me? I think it's just the volume needs to be down. Got it? Okay. All right. So our book fair is going to be held at LBES in the first week of June. We are very grateful for our librarians working hard to make sure that this opportunity is available for our kids. Even in this unprecedented year, they're working on making sure we follow the guidance and give the kids the opportunity to take a look at the books. 8th grade promotion, Monday, June 7th is happening. We sent out a communication yesterday. We will more than likely be reconvening with the 8th grade promotion committee just to kind of take a look at current guidance and make sure that there's no other adjustments that we can make given the current state of things in our community with regard to COVID. our 5th grade picnic, and it will be held on June 7th. Our 5th grade clap off on June 9th. And there will be a 5th grade virtual tour of LBMS. That will be virtual so that we can ensure that all kids at home and in person have the same experience, but they're going to walk the kids around virtually. And then we'll spend a little bit more time and make the 6th grade locker day more of an emphasis in the fall so that the 5th graders have extra time to kind of walk around the building and get accustomed to things in the fall. We have our 3rd annual Kid to Kid experience at LBES on June 8th. Field day at LBES, June 2nd through the 4th. And we also have the ABC Countdown happening at LBES, and we thought maybe the board would be interested in participating. Our next board meeting is on Pajama Day, though, so I'm not sure that we would want to do that, but that is perhaps a discussion item for the board.
Up to you guys.
Just throwing
Come
it
as
out.
you- Is that it, Lisa?
That's it, unless there's any questions.
I just want to say thank you. I know that the administration has worked hard and there've been a lot of parent volunteers working on these committees as well. And it's really exciting that our 5th graders get their picnic and their clap off and the 8th graders get their graduation and everybody gets field day and Kid to Kid. It just feels like a really positive way to end this year. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the partnership we have with our parents. PTO obviously plays a big part in this and helping us organize and helping us with the details and logistics. So we can't thank our partners enough to be able to offer all these opportunities.
All right. So moving on, the next item has to do with equity, and it's an ongoing equity discussion that the old board had started, and this board will now assume control for. So Dr. Leali is going to take us through a little bit of a history and tell us about where we are headed, and then I'm going to encourage the board to engage in an open dialogue so that we can kind of hash out and air out some of our thoughts and feelings about all of this and where we want to head. So take it away, Dr. Leali.
Absolutely. So I appreciate the opportunity to kind of provide an update on where we are. And even though we've had a few discussions this year, they were with the previous board. And so I wanted us to have an opportunity to reconvene on this issue as we begin our journey as a new leadership team. And thought it would be appropriate for us to take a little bit of a step backward and look where we've been and do a little bit of a timeline and kind of what's happened previous to me being here and then how this all evolved. So first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that Lake Bluff has always taken time at a board level and at a community level to look at achievement and growth data for all of our students. And part of how we do that is we look at students by subgroup. We look at different cohorts of students and kind of take a look at how some of our traditionally underserved populations are performing. And so that's been included in your data presentations previous to my arrival. And then when you began looking for a replacement for Dr. Sophie, your search firm compiled a superintendent profile, which you utilized to find your candidate. And I went back and kind of reviewed those because that was something that I looked at when I applied for the position. And there were a few nods to equity in the superintendent profile. So there were many parents and community members that participated in focus groups. And out of those focus groups came some new superintendent priorities. And one of those was that the ask was for the new superintendent to be aware of the changing demographics in the district and begin to develop a plan to address the changing needs required to make all students successful. And obviously that's, of course, in alignment with your strategic plan that we want all of our kids to have an excellent education and achieve the goals that we have for them. And then a survey was sent out to the community and parents. And 55% of the survey responses indicated that diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that was the way that was phrased, indicated that would be the district's greatest challenge moving forward. So in my interview process, as I was kind of meeting folks around the district, that was part of the discussion that we were having, would be sort of ideas on how to begin to address this issue. With the previous board, we did a few open session conversations, 2 in October and 1 in November. The second one in October had to do with whether or not the previous board wanted to support a belief statement that was put forward by the Illinois Association of School Boards that would support the idea of equitable instruction for school districts in Illinois. And ultimately, the previous board did pass in support of that resolution. And then finally, as you know, a couple weeks ago, the administrative team communicated to the community that we would be beginning a new task force that we are calling Thrive to start to look at this very issue. And our tagline at this point is we thrive in 65. And what that stands for is that we trust, honor, respect, include, and value everyone. And then that's something that we do every day in alignment with our mission and vision statement. And so just to take a look at what we're thinking about with regards to what this task force might be doing, our next steps would be to take a look at the data that we actually have in the district. Some of that would be with regard to achievement and growth. Some will be perception data that we're collecting and have collected for a couple of years, either through 5 Essentials survey or our new climate and culture survey. And then as a group to determine what other information do we need before we move forward, because I can guarantee that as we start to have that discussion about what we have, it will force us to ask more questions. And we'll be presented with this idea that we don't have a full picture of kind of how everyone feels and what the student experience really looks like in both of our schools. So looking at what more data we need and how we might want to collect that. And then the group, after having looked at all that, would then move forward with possibly creating a recommendation, either for like a resolution or a mission statement for the work that the board might approve, or a particular board policy that they might think the board could adopt. And then this task force would exist to support with further action planning and kind of develop how we think we should address what issues come up through our data analysis and discussions. And then finally, to assess our impact and progress and whatever that looks like. So again, the task force is there as sort of this framework for us to work together collaboratively to define what the equity work will look like in our district and how we want to address it collaboratively between community, teachers, students, parents, administrators, and community organizations. The goal here is to have many stakeholders in that group that would represent a community-wide support system for this work, so that it's not just living here in District 65, but that we've engaged with lots of folks in the community that engage with our students and parents on many different levels. And so with that, I would open up for any questions or discussion that this board would like to have on the issue.
I have a question about the logistics of this. I just can't remember now. When we first, and Mark, you're probably best able to answer this, but when we first started looking for a new superintendent, I remember the focus groups that were part of the interview process. And I remember the interview process, but then remind me, was there also a survey or a questionnaire on the district website that any family in district could answer?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And do we know if the equity, inclusion, diversity question was part of that survey?
I'm not sure if I know the answer to that. Lisa, the survey you were quoting, was that part of your hiring process when we were polling the community, or is that from something else?
So I'm going to share my screen with you right now.
I do remember us talking about it in the interview process very much, but I just couldn't remember if it was part of the survey that the entire district was invited to.
Yeah, so this was taken from the profile report that School Exec Connect gave after engaging with the community through the survey and focus groups to develop the ideal candidate profile.
And just so people know, that's the search firm. School Exec Connect is the search firm we hired to find the new superintendent, ultimately leading to hiring Dr. Lee Allen.
Right, and so as it indicates here, the online survey was for school staff, parents, and community members. So I'm assuming that that was open to anyone.
It was.
And then, so as you can see, there were 10 focus groups with 62 participants and 154 responses to the online survey.
Okay.
And then the focus group questions were mainly on strengths and attributes of the why would a new superintendent want to come to Lake Bluff? So a lot came out of that in terms of strengths of the community and things that Lake Bluff is really feeling great about, and then some challenges. And so that is where the new superintendent priorities came from. And so you can see that number 5 has to do with kind of watching the changing demographics. And then this talks about planning. And then there's some other pieces that talk about professional development and kind of, how to address those pieces internally. And then on the surveys, of the 154 responses, 62% were parents, 34 teachers, and you can see the breakdown there. District strengths came from the survey, and then greatest challenges. I'm assuming since it was worded that way, that was also in the survey that way, although I haven't seen it.
I'm actually looking at the survey right now. I was able to pull it up from our previous, and it's right there. And this is the one that went out to everybody. So that helps. It was
does
in
help.
that. I'm looking
Yeah.
at the question right here.
Good. So I would encourage anybody on the board to take this opportunity to ask for any questions you might have about any of anything related to this topic and where the district might be going. I would ask you to seek clarification, share some of the concerns you might be hearing from your neighbors, and share your opinions so that it's all out there for the public to hear about.
So the feedback that I have heard from the community is a lot of the people who are concerned, is a lot of, are we putting this into curriculum? How will this look in the curriculum? Is this something we should be focusing on when kids may have missed pieces of curriculum over COVID? And essentially, does it get inserted into their day-to-day curriculum?
So if
Yeah,
I
I agree with Amy. I got the same feedback, was the concern about curriculum and what would be taught to the kids specifically regarding the equity and inclusion.
Do we have any sense for what that looks like, Dr. Leali, or is it too early in the process to even comment on that?
Yeah, so it's really early to talk through that. Certainly as we look as a committee, as we look at the various aspects of the district, all the way from student experience, teacher experience, to materials and resources, to perceptions from any of the groups, that will come up in terms of where we are with a curriculum that is reflective of the students that we serve. How that looks and any adjustments we make, or even the process to go about adjusting or auditing the curriculum, will be something that the task force will have to talk through. As we've talked a little bit about curriculum being a lot more than just the textbooks. When we talk about curriculum, it's not necessarily what we're teaching, but it's also, do our teachers prepared to give students a big picture idea and to provide them with the right questions to ask and to think through big ideas so that they can actually create their own opinions, look at the information that they have available to them, look at multiple perspectives, and create an opinion on their own that they can then support with evidence and be able to, justify. And so I look at equity more as a lens and less of the thing that you teach. It's more just sort of making sure that we're addressing and realizing that there are multiple perspectives in our community, and that we want to make sure that our children see not only the perspectives of their neighbors, but also globally outside of Lake Bluff, that there are other perspectives and experiences that can be highlighted and studied as well.
Is there any guidance from the Illinois State Board of Education or the state legislature related to any of this that we are required to follow, or their guidance that is suggested we follow?
Yeah, so Illinois State Board of Education has been very clear that equity needs to be work that we do as kids are transitioning back from COVID. There's been a lot from the state board that's talked about inequities that have existed over this time period, in addition to before COVID, and the fact that those may have been exacerbated, and that as we come back, we really want to be rethinking how we're addressing the supports that kids need and how it might look different for certain groups of kids who have maybe had more or less of an impact given their circumstances. Definitely culturally responsive teaching has been included in teacher preparation programs moving forward in the future. They've been very clear that we want our new teachers to be equipped with the tools and strategies to have appropriate conversations and to prepare students to engage in dialogue and critical thinking around issues of equity. And it goes far beyond race towards socioeconomic class and gender identity and cognitive neurodiversity, and even just, achievement gaps between boys and girls in certain academic areas. So really, again, it's about thinking critically. How do we remove barriers from certain groups that aren't able to access our opportunities in the same way that other groups are able to?
So to be clear, the state has some parameters that they want us to include, but is Illinois, I don't want to use too many acronyms, the Illinois State Board of Education or any other governing body that we must follow telling us exactly any specific curricular changes we must make or include?
Not at this point. We do have mandated units of study that we need to incorporate into our curriculum. Those have been around for quite some time. And within those, there is some choice. So for example, we need to study genocide. We need to talk about certain time periods in our history where that has happened. But there are also areas where we can choose locally where we want kids to investigate and where we want them to study. So curriculum is definitely an issue of local control. There are some mandates that we have to do. We can choose how we want to do those. Typically, we get audited by the state. We need to do them in some way, shape, or form. We get feedback from the state after our audits. And so moving forward, that could potentially become part of an audit, maybe an equity framework or something like that, but that is not in there yet. But I can tell you that it is the focus of much of the communication coming out from ISB in the past year and a half, because we are anticipating, not having assessment data from spring of last year, having not a lot of assessment data from this spring. Looking forward, we want to make sure we're prepared to give additional resources to those students that need them.
I would like to make a suggestion that whether it's connected to the Thrive Committee or some form of record keeping on our school website that is a reference or a resource for the community, that we keep tabs on all the mandates and requirements that the state has for us and have active links for those. So anybody who's interested and curious about what the state is requiring and how that's shaping where we're headed, it's easy for them to access and read, as well as links to all your Thrive meetings. So whoever's curious about where this is headed and where it's come from can follow the genesis of it as quickly as clicking on a link on our website, because this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in on both sides of the issue, and it would be great to have it all easily referenceable and available.
That makes sense.
That's a good point, Mark. I like that. I think it's also sort of important to explore this idea that, equity can be an emotional topic. It can be a political topic. People can have really, really strong feelings about it, but that we also need to recognize that ultimately we all have the same goal, which is the best opportunities in education for our kids in Lake Bluff. That's always been everybody's goal here, I believe, right? And so this equity discussion doesn't, correct me if I'm not saying this correctly, but we're not talking about taking opportunities away from kids and giving them to other kids. What we're talking about is lifting everybody up to give them the best curriculum, the best teachings, the best opportunities, the best everything that we can for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, we want all of our students to shine. We want all of our students to feel valued. We want all of our students to come as they are, with all the things, all the gifts that they bring to us every day. And we want them to feel comfortable in that space, you know, whether they're with friends or whether they're with teachers or whether they're out in the community, for them to feel a sense of belonging. And I do believe that that is a value of the community. And I believe that that's something that many of us want and have wanted for some time. And so part of this work is to dig in a little bit, and where are the areas that we might not be doing as well as we could? And could we just shed some light on that and listen to our students and parents, help us with how we could be better. We're not starting from ground zero. This is a really caring and kind community that has the best of all of our students at heart. And I think this is really more about, we see that some of our students are struggling in our system based on our data. Our administrative team and staff have shared some stories with me of times when kids have felt that they aren't really feeling a sense of belonging, or they don't really have a connection the way we'd like them to. Some people have shared those things with me. But I think for us to create a place that's safe, where people can share their stories with each other and we can start to problem solve together around how do we create the right conditions for all of our kids. And it's not going to be an end. There's probably not going to be a time when we get to the perfect conditions for everyone, but that we have that ongoing conversation and opportunity out there so that we can keep getting better.
I just add, I love that phrase, a sense of belonging. I think that sums up the work really well. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Leali, and the admin team for taking the step to move this forward and to start the Thrive Task Force, and to be really digging in and looking at ways that we can make sure every kid feels that sense and every family feels that sense of belonging. So yeah, I really love that you started that, and happy to support it in any way.
I think it's important to what you said about all kids. So I think the impression may be at different groups of kids, but inclusion overall. So we're talking about full community, whether it be a typical learner who's struggling from the pandemic, or an advanced learner that is struggling to get back to where they were.
Absolutely.
And I think doing some work also with the high school, because they're doing a lot of work with inclusion of different kinds. So we might be able to learn a little bit from, and it's all a new undertaking. So we might be able to learn a little bit from their process.
Absolutely. Great point.
I have a couple of questions. In the November meeting, when there's a discussion of this, you'd mentioned Dr. Leali working with other districts, as well as possibly having an independent audit of equity, how it stands now in our district. Is that something you're still looking at, or are you still in contact with nearby districts about
Yes.
working with them as well?
Yeah, so through NSSED, we have created a small group of districts that are interested in working on this regionally. And so we're starting to look at our demographics kind of as a group, and where can we support each other with different initiatives, and how can we help share resources and things like that. So that group is ongoing, although I think that will be more like an articulation group and sharing of resources. As far as an external audit, that's still on the table. And I think if the task force decides there's a lot more information that we need, and we don't really feel equipped ourselves to gather it in a way that we think makes sense, or it's going to be too much work and reinventing the wheel, and there might be something out there that we can do that would give us valid and reliable data, that still might be something that we would take advantage of. But I really like to have that conversation with a bigger group to determine if there is that need or desire to do that.
I know previously you also mentioned the opportunity to maybe do some board development and training in this regard. Is that still part of the plan too?
Yes, and as you know, we have our Getting Started workshop next week, and that's something that we'll talk about internally as a board. Where do we feel like we want to go on this? You know, and what is it that you're wondering about, or how do you feel like this group could take advantage of some opportunities, some leadership opportunities, or just learning opportunities, so that we can get ahead of that work as well.
Mark, I think you're muted, but I just wanted to ask really fast, like circling back then, like, yes, it will have a piece in potentially our curriculum going forward in the future? And then like, what does that look like for curriculum? I know that it's presented, but what kind of say do parents have, or even the board, into, changes in the curriculum?
So that, again, we'll have to kind of go through that task force in terms of a dialogue or collaboration around that. And it might look like we want to just first look at our resources and see if we have a diverse group of books, or we have diverse literature in the rooms, and we might identify some places where we want to support with additional materials for student choice reading. Or we might get down to looking at the textbooks that we've adopted and say, do they have any information on, how they design the textbooks and what they did in terms of their process to make sure that it's an inclusive textbook that has resources for lots of different kinds of kids. There could be a lot of different ways that we would look at it. And in terms of, again, like I said, content, I think that's going to be an evolving conversation. Hold on. Okay. I think when we talk about just skills for the future for students, I think we can all agree that schools are not the only places that kids get information anymore. Anytime a student wants to look up something, they have the information at their fingertips. And what we really need to be thoughtful of is that we need to provide the tools for kids to sift through all that information and to be asking the right questions and to be getting the right information in the right ways when they need it. And to be able to identify, are these trusted sources? Are these not trusted sources? How do I know? How can I get support with that? So that moving forward, when they do want to know something and they do have that desire to learn more, that they have a framework in their brain for saying, this is how I evaluate what I'm looking at. And this is how I'm going to decide whether or not to trust a resource. And it will be about them having to kind of develop that internally too. What are they looking for? What are ways that we can trust sources? Or when we look at research, how broad does the research base have to be? Or those kinds of things. And I'm sure you've talked about that in the past here as well, that 21st century skills are all about that. Kids are not needing to remember facts and figures and dates and people necessarily, because those are things they can look up. What they need to know are the big ideas. They need to look for patterns. They need to be able to evaluate and synthesize, create opinions, and justify their opinions with evidence. So those are some of the conversations we'll have as a team as well, to say, where are we doing that? Could we do it more? Or maybe we're doing it enough, but we could be doing it in different areas. And how do our students feel about that? And do we really have a good handle on how well we're doing that? So those are some of the ways that curriculum discussion could go.
I think there's some concern in the community too, that we'll see in the task force, which will be great to be able to all talk about it, that there's a thin line between what people want to teach at home and what they want taught at school. So I think by having that task force and everybody being together, we can identify where the middle ground is or what is acceptable to everybody.
It's a great point. And it's a lot like when the state issued social emotional learning standards. I feel like it was about 10, 15 years ago that the state instituted social emotional learning standards. And we had the same discussion. It was like, whose responsibility is this part? And eventually we settled into, there is a space for this in our schools as we're facilitating conversations and helping kids develop friendships and connecting with other kids. And so I think this will be an evolving conversation, and you're absolutely right that that's going to be part of the discussion.
Well, and that's a beauty of our small community too, right? Is that we can do something like a task force and hear from so many people, and we are accessible to all of our constituency, right? So that we actually get to hear all the different opinions and ideas and thoughts and bring those together to move forward, right?
And I think it's very important to have a diversity of opinions on the task force. I know there's people who have concerns about it, and I support the task force, but their voices should be heard. And I think that will build, it will make the task force more useful to have a diversity of voices on there. So.
Absolutely, for sure.
I would encourage can you guys hear me okay? I had to switch my mode of getting into the meeting. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I would thank you. I'd encourage any further opinion or discussion. Also, I would also encourage any question. I don't know about the rest of you, but I often have questions that as I think about these meetings over the next few days, things pop into my mind that I wish I had asked on camera. So I would encourage you to email those to Dr. Leali so she can address them for you and then share them with the board. I would also like to take this opportunity to do two things. One is to acknowledge the direction given to Dr. Leali to open up this discussion and to head down this path by the prior board. You know, 4 board members stepped down. We have 4 new board members. We have an entirely new board. And so I tip the hat and acknowledge the old board and starting this conversation. Dr. Leali posted something on her screen earlier that showed the dates of the meetings in which we discussed it. I know there were some folks in the community looking for specific communications and emails that might have directed her to go down this path, which do not exist. But there's plenty of discussion on camera and out in the open that gave her the direction to start pondering these questions. But now it's time for the new board to think along these lines. And while this is not an action item, a board does have the ability to give direction to its administration in the form of, you could call it a straw poll, if we to let them know if we think that it is worth the using the resources, expending the resources, the time, the money, the energy to continue to pursue this idea of learning more about equity and forming this task force and exploring what it looks like in our community. Just reminding everybody that nothing is set in stone. It's not fixed. We haven't decided on anything, but we've got a task force that is soon ready to be up and running to help answer some of those questions. So I'd like each of the board, and I'll be the 7th person to answer, to say this, say what I feel, but I'd like each of the board members to tell us for the record if they think it's worth the time for administration to move forward on this project. You could just say yes or no, or you could give a more in-depth answer.
Yes, 100% for me.
I'm a yes also.
I'm a yes too.
I'm a yes too.
Yes.
Yes,
And I would also agree that I fully support dedicating resources to exploring this forward, exploring this more. So I think the board has spoken clearly, and we are looking forward to hearing more about this in the future and learning more about the Thrive Task Force and see where that takes us and the community. So thank you for all you're doing on that, and looking forward to hearing more about it.
Thank you so much.
If there's nothing else on equity, I'll give anybody the opportunity to raise something if they want to. We're going to move on.
Okay, so we have a return to learn update that's going to be fairly brief tonight. I just want to assure the community that we continue to look at updated guidance in our planning. As you know, we released a survey yesterday to ask families to indicate who are remote. Families who are remote now to indicate whether or not they will be asking for a remote option in the fall. ISB has narrowed the guidance on this to only students with medical conditions that have a supporting documentation from a physician or somebody in their home with a medical condition like that. And at this time, we have had good response to the survey and only a few maybes. We don't have any firm yeses. So that's good information for us to have as we're planning. Right now, we are planning on a fairly normal year, planning on offering all our sports and clubs a normal schedule, utilizing our buses again and filling them more to capacity. We are planning for the contingency that we will still be having close contacts and having kids have to quarantine for extended periods of time. That's what we're planning on right now. Although I know that the Illinois Department of Health is still evaluating that 6-foot close contact definition. But for now, we're looking at our options for that because we do know that that's a very long period of time for kids to be out of school. At this time, we still have a 3-foot spacing requirement between students as a minimum and 6 feet at lunch. From what I have heard as recently as today, from my association, which is in contact with the ISB and Illinois Department of Health, masking is in our future for a while. So as you know, we have some opportunities for our 12-year-olds and up to be vaccinated. have already started talking to different folks about how we might be able to offer opportunities when the vaccinations are younger than 12, or when the majority of our kids can be vaccinated, maybe having a clinic here. So we would like to promote that and be able to provide that for our community. But at this time, it's a much more traditional year. We're excited about it. We want all our kids back, and we'd like to be able to have the experience a lot more like it was pre all this, utilizing some of the best features that we learned. You know, some things that we learned, Zoom parent-teacher conferences were very convenient for some of our parents. So we will probably continue to offer some things like that, or parent engagement events where there's a Zoom option. Because we know some of this has been a convenience, and we want to keep that parent engagement piece up. So trying to learn our best lessons, keep those things moving forward, but really get back to the best instruction that we know we can offer here at Lake Bluff.
Lisa, is there guidance on music, band, all of that? stuff?
Music band will start up again. The guidance hasn't changed much. We're ordering equipment for the instruments. My own son plays trombone, so he leaves with a mask for the bell of his instrument, as well for his face, where he can have the trombone. So we are ordering that type of equipment. There's a little bit more in terms of spacing out that we need to do for choir and band. But we are planning on those programs being up and running as well.
And if, assuming 3 feet is still the case in the fall, there's no issues having all of our students back with that?
We will have all of our students back. What we won't have is a normal layout, probably, in terms of where students are for certain things. So we are still looking at our school maps, specifically with regard to small group instruction. We have very small office spaces and small group spaces, where sometimes we would typically have 4 or 5 students, and we just can't fit that many kiddos in there. So we are still rethinking the maps. But other than that, we will have everyone back.
Lisa, do we think that there'll be plexiglass still at the student desks, or any guesses?
I don't believe that we will still have the plexiglass shields. I think that the masking will be enough. We will have as much PPE as anybody could want. We will provide those things for people. As you know, we continue to reevaluate our HVAC systems, make sure those are up to speed and adjusted for the seasons and things like that. We're still planning on utilizing the outdoor spaces as much as possible. The plexiglass has been great, but has also been a barrier for kids as they're in school and trying to see each other and the teacher. So we'll be spending some time removing those this summer.
Any other questions for Dr. Leali? Not hearing any. Now we're going to move to item 6D, the policy manual customization project update.
Great. Another very short update. Our administrative team has met. We are whittling it down to our final draft. We're going to have, I hope, one subcommittee meeting with the policy committee, old and new. We're going to have a couple members from our previous committee come back and join us to meet with our new subcommittee to go through the changes and get any final questions answered. And then we are hoping to have a draft for your approval at the June meeting.
Great. And then we have item E, which is the fine arts computer purchase.
I've asked Nate to come and present the proposal and give his perspective and history on the project.
All right, thanks everybody. Dr. Leali, I'll share my screen if I have that capability. We have a brief presentation to show. It's only 5 slides long, I promise.
You're good to go, Nate.
All right, thank you. There we go. All right. Pardon me while I move some things around. You able to see that slideshow okay? All right, so as a quick history lesson, believe it or not, Lake Bluff Middle School and Lake Bluff District 65 was one of the early adopters of one-to-one devices for students. That was 14 years ago, if you could believe it. And so in that amount of time, we've learned a lot. And as technology has progressed, as resources have progressed, as online tools have progressed, we have transitioned away from the MacBook devices that we had used for the bulk of our one-to-one programming in favor of Chromebooks. So a machine closer to $300 as compared to a $1,600 MacBook has worked very well for us as far as most of the day-to-day academic classes. And holy cow, have we used those devices in a way that we didn't envision as we moved into our pandemic instruction. However, one of the conversations that began as Chromebooks started to emerge as the primary resource or primary tool for us at the middle school was just how we could continue to offer some of the fine arts programming that we did using a device that, unlike a Chromebook, had more memory, had more capability of creation. And I'm a little nervous here because we've got, Paul on our call. So I'm going to do my best to make sure I've got all the lingo correct. So Paul Sanchez, if you want to jump in and correct me at any point, feel free. But I'm going to just sort of jump into what we're proposing and requesting. One of the things that began as soon as our sixth graders, and just so you understand, Chromebooks came in initially in sixth grade for 1 year, and then the following year moved on up into sixth and seventh grade, and then fully middle school, 6, 7, 8, the following. So this was a gradual rollout. And one of the things our fine arts teachers worked hard at doing, along with support of our tech staff, specifically Lori Brown at the time, was trying to identify online tools and resources that did a lot of the same things that the Chromebooks once did. One of the key differences between a Chromebook and a more traditional laptop is the presence of a hard drive and memory. And so what this meant was a lot of what was being created and done in the fine arts classes had to be uploaded to some sort of online tool. When we're talking about the sorts of things that kids were doing, a lot of it includes music creation, film editing, and development in terms of video, also photography. So there were definitely some hurdles to overcome. I would say that we had limited success with that. Certainly the Chromebook as a creation device has become much, much more capable. But for a lot of what our students are doing, particularly in some of our fine arts classes, and that includes 6th, 7th, and 8th grade art, that includes 7th grade film arts, theater arts, filmmaking, and a lot of the cross-curricular STEAM classes, Chromebooks still just aren't sufficient. They really are not user-friendly to the extent that even just uploading some of the film, data that has been recorded on some of our external cameras and devices onto a Chromebook and then somehow getting it onto an online platform has been really just cumbersome, if not downright impossible. So one of the things that we had actually planned to move forward with prior to this current school year was a proposal to purchase a classroom set of Chromebooks. That was put on hold for this year simply because we weren't sure what the fine arts programming would look like. We weren't sure what our in-person options were going to be. And so we're bringing that back to the board for consideration and some explanation behind why it is it's coming your way. In essence, these are the things that we're hoping to be able to support in those classes. And really we need a device with RAM, random access memory, right, Paul? And so Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, animation, Final Cut Pro is a big one for our students who are doing digital photography. And then, of course, we have some animation tools that kids are using and creating some amazing things. They're working into a lot of videos that we are sharing out with our students, but not something easily done on a Chromebook. In terms of just, and this is something where we would work with Paul to make sure we've got it right. But this is just a general overview of what we think the specs would need to be for the devices that we're talking about in terms of just how much memory, size, speed. This is kind of your entry level 13-inch MacBook Chromebook specs that you're looking at here. So that's kind of the background in terms of what we're looking for. pardon me as I work to find my stop sharing screen feature. There we go. That's sort of the background of this request. And I want to definitely be available to answer any questions, but I know, Jay, you wanted to talk a little bit about the financial end of it.
Sure. Well, that was well said. And this is the big tech meeting. We're going to talk about a lot of tech this meeting. So it's a good kickoff. The total cost for these computers is approximately a little over $40,000. And that includes all the software. That would be for 24 computers that we would put in next year's budget.
One thing I would add to that is that we would store those at school primarily. They could be checked out to students when they need to be checked out, but we already have the charging portable stations that they would go in. Those were repurposed from Chromebook carts that we had previously. So in terms of just how students would access those day to day, they would be used in the classroom, but also available to kids who need to take them home if they're going to do some homework to do that film editing there.
Did you guys say which budget year this hits? Is it next year? I think.
I would put it in the next year's budget, and because it's a purchase that we can make easily, if I have room this year, I might try to get it out of the way and free up some space next year, but it's currently in the next year's budget.
Okay. Just so the new board members know, this meeting is called the Committee of the Whole, and at the Committee of the Whole, basically we very rarely take action on items, and we have lots of discussion about things that are going to be action items in the future. And the idea is to give you guys some time to think about these things, to ponder them, to ask questions, and to come back with more afterwards if you want. But a typical process is that an item is brought to your attention, one or two Committee of the Whole meetings in advance of an actual action item. So I suppose we'll be looking at this to vote on in June, perhaps? Is that the plan?
We'd bring it back probably at the May board meeting or the June meeting, one of the two.
Okay. So if there's any other questions for Jay or Mr. Blackmer? If not, we will move on. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it. Thanks, Nate.
Thanks, Nate.
Sorry, I gotta find my, there we go. Moving on to the, back to Jay, I think, the IT infrastructure upgrade at the elementary school.
Yep, so I wanted to bring this is definitely going in next year's budget. And this is a basically an upgrade of all of our wireless internet infrastructure at the elementary school. This is done on a regularly routine basis. We expect the wireless infrastructure to last 5 to 7 years before becoming obsolete. If you think about your home computer, if you've got one that's 5 years old, it's probably not performing as well as it used to. Technology just increases really quickly. So we sort of expected this and had it in our long-term capital plan. The access points are still supported by the software maker. They usually actually stop supporting them after about 7 years. And we were not planning, we were going to try to push it another year or two, but just given the load that we've placed on them this school year, we've had, and some of the issues we've had at the elementary school with coverage, there's some dead spots, and just we've been Zooming a lot, and it requires a lot of bandwidth. And it's been taking a lot of time away from Paul. In troubleshooting, we had to bring in engineers to solve some issues. So we talked about it as a technology team with Diopath, our consultant, and with Paul, and decided to go ahead and replace them this year, next year in the next year's budget. And the total cost for that would be $58,000. And one of the other nice things is that the federal government has a program for schools and libraries where they will subsidize the cost of technology because they want all kids in different to have the access. So we get a 40% subsidy on this cost. So 40% of that would be returned as or rebated, reimbursed to us. And the access points at the middle school are a year newer. When we did this originally 5 years ago, we did elementary first, and then we did middle. So we're not planning on doing middle until the following year, but we're also not having the same kinds of issues, internet issues that we've had at middle. So they're a year newer, and we've had no problems with them. So those we may even push an additional year. But when the funding is there, we also want to take advantage of it. So if there are any questions, I asked Paul to come to help answer questions about this. And then we've got some more tech stuff to talk about later on.
So Jay and Paul, this is kind of a broad question, since I really feel, I don't know about other board members, but very much out of my league in terms of being qualified to even ask the right questions here. How do you guys know what questions to ask, and who do you rely on to give you information you can trust and feel comfortable with, so that we're not spending more than we need to be spending?
Yeah, I can speak to that, Jay, if you don't mind, because I actually did want to piggyback off something that some of the things that Jay said, and I think it kind of falls in line to what you're asking, Mark, is that one of the issues that we're having in the elementary school is that the access points, which are the wireless controllers that are in the ceiling that the students and staff connect to, not just that they're 5 years old, but they've also become legacy to the manufacturers, so they no longer support them.
Oh.
So once we started having some challenges with the wireless devices at the elementary school, that's when the ball of yarn started unraveling, if you will, and we started. There's where we started having to ask the questions: is what do we have? When was it last updated? How effective is it now with the new environment of a lot of online streaming, which takes up a large part of the bandwidth within those units? And it became increasingly challenging for myself and even the engineers when we're working with the manufacturers. And their best bet or their best suggestion at that point was that just, making small changes without fully being able to support those devices, just due to the nature that they were outdated and they were no longer in production and therefore no longer supported. So we started to run into a lot of issues, and I think this is one of the reasons why we pushed it forward a little bit sooner than we would have probably wanted to. At either rate, like Jay mentioned, 5 to 7 years is about industry standard for replacing these kind of devices. If you look at something like the middle school, those devices that may last a little longer than 5 to 7 years, they're, as long as they're still supported by the manufacturers and we're able to continue to upgrade the firmware and upgrade the software that goes along with it, then they still are usable. But it's when we're running into legacy items where they're no longer supported or upgradable that we really start to run into problems. So that's why we looked at renewing or upgrading the system. And since the elementary school does feed into the middle school, it is basically a core upgrade from the head end, essentially, that feeds. Not only will it upgrade the elementary school, but it would also increase the capacity at the middle school without having to change the equipment, the hardware at the middle school. And just numbers wise, we have a lot more students and a lot more devices at the elementary school than we do at the middle school. So therefore, it just causes more wear and tear on those devices. When I looked at the proposal from DialPath, I was doing my due diligence to see exactly what we're being charged for and what the equipment is that is needed. And through that, DialPath has been a great partner with us, where the hardware that we're getting is really at a wholesale rate versus a retail rate. So there is a substantial amount of savings in the actual hardware itself, and the software as well too. So Meraki and Cisco are probably the top 1 and 2 products on the market that we can use. So it's what I looked at it to be a very fair proposal. And after reviewing it and meeting with Dial Path engineers and meeting with Jay, this is exactly what we need for application right now. I don't know if that fully answered your question.
No, it does. Absolutely. And
I also wanted to point out that as a condition of using federal money, these devices need to be bid. So we send the specs to our E-rate consultant, and then they put it out on the street and collect bids from a lot of places. So from that standpoint, we normally don't bid technology, but whenever we're using E-rate funds, which is the federal money, we do bid it. So I feel comfortable with the pricing as well.
Okay, I'm gonna pivot a little here. Thanks, Jay, and thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. That answers my question. But my pivot question is, since you raised it, Jay, for new board members, a little education here. At what dollar amount, or what are the rules under which we are required to bid things out?
So the state, there's a whole section of the school code that governs that. The short answer is $25,000. So whenever we purchase goods or services have a contract for goods or services for more than $25,000, it needs to be publicly bid. Our board policy requires our board to approve anything above $25,000. We would bring things that are less than that, but if they're still a significant amount, just for transparency. There are some exceptions to that $25,000 rule. Construction is $50,000. And then there's a list of exceptions. There's maybe 15, maybe a dozen or so exceptions of things that don't require bidding, regardless of the dollar amount. And technology, copiers, professional services like your attorneys, those types of things are listed in some of those exceptions. But the board would always see anything 25,000 or more.
I appreciate, sorry to put you on the spot. I appreciate the thorough answer. Anytime we can help people learn, that's always helpful. So thanks. Okay, any questions for Jay or Paul about this IT system, infrastructure upgrade?
Jay, I'm sorry, say this again. So for technology, we don't have to bid it out. We don't have to get.
That's correct.
Okay. And Paul, forgive me again for this one. We're upgrading equipment and software.
Right. The licensing, I should say, for the equipment, it requires licensing to run on their platforms.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right. Anybody else have any questions? All right, this is another one of those items that's going to come back. We're discussing it in advance of a vote in a future meeting, which is very typical. So now we're going to move on to this is some new state level mandate, Student Online Personal Protection Act, otherwise known as SOPA. I think Jay's doing this as well, right?
Yes, and then Paul's going to hop in, and Lisa's going to join me as well in a little bit. So if I can share my screen, I'll drive the presentation. Okay. So I wanted to talk to you tonight to update the board on the Student Online Privacy Protection Act and how it's changing the management of our educational technology. So we call it SOPA. It's again, Student Online Privacy Protection Act. It's a new Illinois law that's going into effect July 1st of 2021. Prior to SOPA, Illinois relied mostly on laws from the 70s designed for paper student records, and they were using these laws to manage digital data. So this new law sort of modernizes and clarifies the responsibilities of K-12 software vendors and school districts in the protection of student privacy with an emphasis on transparency. And they're defining K-12 software vendors as any internet website, online service, online application, or mobile application that's intended to be used in K-12 schools. In the law, they refer to these vendors as operators. So I'm not going to go through all these, but there's already a lot of privacy laws on the books, both federal and state. And so this is another acronym to add to the list. in terms of protecting privacy online. So this law is pretty onerous. Effective July 1st, school districts must post a list of all the operators. Again, those are the K-12 education operators of online services or applications that the district uses, and also a list of any subcontractors. So all those have to go on our website. We need to post all the contracts with each of these operators within 10 business days of signing them, and no student information is allowed to be shared with any operator without a written agreement. We need to post, and then in addition, we need to post what's being shared. So all the data elements being collected, maintained or disclosed we need to post on our website what kind of data we're sharing and explain it in terms that are understandable to parents and explain why we disclose it. We also need to have a written process for how parents can exercise their right to inspect, review this covered information and to correct it if necessary. And this process also has to be posted. And what I mean by covered information is any information that's specifically identifiable to a student. We are required to publish if there's any data breaches where greater than 10% of our students' data was exposed. We also need to publish that on our website. And we need to adopt a board policy which will designate formal authority for signing contracts and will restrict it to only those individuals. And then we need to ourselves implement and maintain what the law says are reasonable IT security procedures and practices that meet or exceed industry standards. And then in addition, we need to, by written agreement, ensure that our operators are also implementing and maintaining strong IT security procedures. And then the school district also may, which I would read should, designate a privacy officer. One will be named in our board policy. We should provide teachers with a list of online operators that are safe and approved for use. And we need to develop an inventory process, a process for keeping our inventory up to date. So we need to know what we have and who has access to it and what data is being shared, and keep that all current and posted on our website. So you can see that this is a big job, and Paul, in conjunction with Diapath, our third-party consultant, has found a really great solution for us that's going to really help make all of these onerous tasks that we need to do doable, especially by July 1st. So I'll let Paul talk about what this solution is.
Yeah, so everything that Jay covered means that that's a big task. It's a lot of work that has to be done into identifying who our vendors are, which are called operators by law, and what data is being shared with them. And it truly is a big feat. So in such a task like that, it's definitely going to come down to an implementation team that is multidisciplinary, which include technology, business, curriculum, and instruction. The platform that we use that was suggested by our consultant is called Learn Platform. And as far as SOPA compliances goes, we can utilize this to catalog our EdTech, which is our educational technology, which encompasses software, apps, websites, and services, as well as browser extensions. Pretty much as Jay stated before, anything that has any student identifiers that our data is being processed through any company or website or app or software. And along with that, it establishes the contract management database, as well as implements the software vetting process and workflow, renegotiating our current contracts for data privacy, and publish required data on our website. So Learn Platform really encompasses all of these things in one centralized location, which makes things a lot easier for a team to put together as we try to meet this deadline. And the added benefits of it is that, again, it does provide a centralized location where we have our EdTech inventory where teachers can go to and find a database of the softwares and products that we currently have, or put together a proposal for software that they're looking to acquire, as well, along with analyzing the EdTech impact on student achievement, identify equity gaps, and guide professional development. So it basically takes the data from the softwares that we're using and compiles all the data to show which apps are most effective with our students and which ones are really moving the needle when it comes to student growth. If we could go to the next slide, Jay. And, again, this is with the district that uses so many different softwares. I think right now we're up to about 780 programs and softwares that we use. Some of the larger school districts use thousands of different types of softwares as tools for teaching and instruction and curriculum. It's very challenging to consolidate all those things. So Learn Platform really does the job for us in identifying all the applications through our browser extensions, which is a great thing of the Chromebooks and the device management systems that we use. It actually captures all of that for us and catalogs it into a library for us, as well as tracks the number of users, teachers that are engaging with the software, students that are engaging with the apps and softwares as well. So it's really a very helpful tool in the sense of giving us that transparency of how we're using the softwares that we do have.
The law covers, let me just jump in, Paul, sorry. The law also covers everything we use, not just the stuff we pay for. So we know the 20 or 30 programs that we have licenses for and we pay for, but if a teacher decides, finds a new software online that they really like, and there's a free trial, or they sign up for it and click through the agreement and they're using it in their classroom, we also have to be able to, that falls under the realm of the law. So we need to be posting that and all those things as well. So, if you've got 100 teachers and each teacher finds a couple of programs that they use, these are websites, these are anything. So there's a lot of stuff that, especially if it doesn't go through an approval process, there's a lot of stuff out there that we're using that we're not even aware of. So this is a great tool because it goes out and finds all the stuff that's going through our devices and it puts it all in one spot for us.
So it'll help you identify things that shouldn't be there too.
Exactly.
Right? Does it do that for student computers or just faculty computers?
No, all computers.
All devices.
Interesting. You might find some interesting stuff.
We have.
Does it track time too, like the amount of time spent in each of those software things? Because I know that this would shine a big light on screen
It
time.
does. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about how we can use the data, but it shows how much time is being spent. So you can use that for, if a program says we recommend this many hours of use on this program for maximum effect, and we're not using it as much as they want you to, and we're not seeing the results, there's analysis like that, but also we can see what's being used the most amount of time, what's being used by the most people. So we can see who's using things the most in our system, what teachers are using them, and teachers can give feedback and things like that. So it's really a powerful tool.
Yeah, and like Jay said, we can we'll cover a little bit more of that in the presentation. When it comes to the cost analysis of what we're spending and the contracts and licenses that we do have with certain vendors, it's a great place that it centralizes all that information for us with keeping track of the agreements, the written agreements that we have, the information on the vendors and the operators, their contact information, the purpose of their software, their platform. It provides the data that is processed between those vendors, exactly, what information is being passed. If there's any student identifying information, then that's something that falls under the SOPA compliance laws, which we need to identify. It also helps us establish the value of the products that we're using. And it identifies the operator subcontractors and any data breaches and other related details. And as Jay was mentioning before, it does allow teachers to rate the softwares, lets us look at the software capabilities and get feedback and find different resources for that. So essentially, again, it's a centralized location where we can house everything. And it provides a good workflow for teachers and any staff that's looking to add different software or applications, or again, identifying those that are being used or not being used and what should or shouldn't be used. And it allows us a vetting process to know what we have in our inventory and what our students' data is being processed through. So that in a shell is what Learn platform, the software will do for us. And if we could go to the next slide here. This is probably one of the more important pieces, not more the important pieces, but a very helpful piece where it helps us renegotiate the current contracts for the data security and data privacy, as well as has a catalog of the data privacy agreement that not only we will be signing on to, but we can see what other districts in the area have been using, and kind of uniform our contracts and our agreements with these vendors, which help us fall under compliance with the law. So that's huge in the sense of making sure that we as a district are staying compliant with what the state is requiring us to do. And
we had some training. Paul sat in on it with us with our attorney. Basically, because we're required to negotiate data privacy and security with every single vendor, that would be an impossible task. And also that every school district would be negotiating with every vendor. It would be too cumbersome to work. So what they've done is there's a national agreement, and then there's an Illinois version of this agreement, like an addendum they stuck on it that's been legally reviewed. It goes through lots of attorneys, and they wrote this single agreement that an individual school district can negotiate with a vendor, and then it gets published in a data privacy consortium, and we have access to it through this platform. And we can go and pull down other districts' negotiated agreements. And if we like the terms of it, then we can just sign on. There's an addendum that we sign, we send it to the company, and then they countersign it, and then we are covered under that agreement. So it's a way to share. It's kind of like purchasing cooperatives where, one district negotiates prices with a big vendor, and then other districts can buy off their contracts. This is a similar thing for data privacy. So it's going to make it a lot easier to comply with. And we actually have access to view the agreements. You can see the screen from any other state. California actually has quite a few that are very strict. We look for the Illinois ones first, and there's usually local districts that have already negotiated agreements. We can sign on with those and post them to our site, and then we're also current. So this is a really nice feature.
Yeah, and definitely last but certainly not least, this provides us a public-facing portal for our stakeholders and our families and our communities to be able to research and see which apps and softwares, which products we're using, and it gives them total access to how we're sharing their students' data, and it gives them the security of knowing that we are treating their students' data with a lot of care and respect, and making sure that we're doing our part to keep everybody's data safe.
Okay, so if we have not convinced you yet about how amazing this program is, I would just say this really solves a lot of problems that I've seen over the last 10 years in terms of the intersection between curriculum, budget and finance and technology. Because a lot of our curricular resources now have a digital component. So it's not even just the apps, it's even your textbooks have a digital component. There's so much to it. And for us to be able to somehow, I've been parts of teams that have tried to create tools to do this. But basically to see, to Carrie's point, how much are we using it? Is it effective with kids? Are we seeing the results we want to see? And is it worth the amount of money that we're spending on it? Even if it's just for 1 or 2 children. So this tool is going to help us a lot, considering we have a pretty lean tech department here in 65. So this is going to be able to help us with not only the compliance aspect with regards to student privacy, which is of utmost importance, but the added value helps us really take a look at whether or not we're picking and using the right resources for our kiddos. And the last piece is just that return on investment. So, and we come full circle, we can have our demographic information in there and actually see if there are certain programs that work with students who are requiring certain interventions or who are working on certain skills and strategies. And we can say, is this an intervention we want to keep going with? Is it working with certain student populations? Is there something better out there? And then there's this network of districts using this program too, where there's some sharing of resources. And so it just gets us into a bigger conversation, gives us more support for compliance, and gives us more tools at our disposal without adding a whole lot of man hours to the few people that we have working on this. So we're really, really excited about this solution. Happy to answer any questions.
This is another example of a state of Illinois unfunded mandate, because I'm sure they're not giving us any funding toward this. And I'm not saying I disagree with the need for student data privacy in a digital age. It's certainly something we need to be moving ahead of the 1970s paper standards that we were working on. But I just, as a teaching moment, this is another example of the many dozens and dozens of unfunded mandates that come from the state. That, you know, the most obvious cost is the software. The Learn platform is expected to cost annual subscription of $8,000 a year and a one-time startup cost of $4,800. But I wonder about man hours invested and time and materials invested that, you know, at the end of the day, what this is really going to cost us. And it's just another stressor on our budget that is very, very limited. So
yeah, that's a good point, Mark. I'm hopeful that this will be worth the money, and we may, you know, be able to find some programs that maybe we're not utilizing to the fullest that we can take out of our inventory and stop spending money on, and that we can just optimize, you know, using the right programs and having the tools in order to get the biggest ROI on the things we are using and get the biggest student achievement growth for the money. So
one thing I would jump in and say is that we really haven't talked about the fact that a program like this takes a lot of time to implement and actually provide professional development for, in terms of not only just the folks that are going to be using the back end and making sure that we're compliant, but also for our teachers to be accessing the reports, or for our administrative team to be looking at things. It's going to take us a little time because there'll be a lot of data that comes out of this for us to look at. But you're right, you know, anytime there's something this big implemented, it's not just the cost, it's the time and energy spent to make sure we're doing it right.
Yeah. And they just keep throwing these things on, which, again, this is probably a worthy cause, but it does stress the system.
It's a good thing. The one thing I'll say is it's been, I don't think there's been a year in the last 5-10 years where I haven't had a parent reach out concerned about student privacy with regard to data and apps and things where kids are entering certain things. And we want our teachers to be able to feel empowered to try new things. And so this process is even going to be helpful to just know, for teachers to know that they have a way to try new things. And then we have a way to know that we're also vetting those new things and doing what we need to do. So.
Any other questions or concerns, comments on the Student Online Personal Protection Act and the related software that we're talking about? Thanks. I guess tonight is the Jay Con show for the most part, right? So we're going to move on to the 2021-22 budget parameters. And for those guys new to the board, I believe this is our first of many
Yes.
budget conversations leading up to approving a budget, correct me if I'm wrong, but in September? I should know this after all 10 or however many years I've been doing this.
Yes, we will be showing, I'll be talking about just what assumptions are going into the budget today. We'll bring a draft budget in May. We're a little bit behind this year just due to COVID and some the third start of school that we had in April. But then in June, we will pass the tentative budget and the final budget will be passed in September.
Right.
The tentative budget allows us to operate. We want the board to actually approve a budget so we can start the fiscal year spending money with an approved budget in July, but the final isn't done until September.
Thank you. Take it away.
All right. So I will try to keep this brief. I'm just going to go through the components or the inputs, parameters into the budget, starting with our revenue. Our 2020 tax levy is an increase over last year of 2.8%. And that's 2.3% increase on existing property. That was the consumer price index. And the remainder of that difference comes from new property. Our debt service levy is pretty much flat. And I'm expecting a collection rate of 99.5% next year. That would be budgeting 99.5%. Last year, that was a big topic of discussion. We were concerned with the recession. We actually ended up at about 99.5 this year after all was said and done. So I'm confident that we will be back there next year.
That's good news.
Yes. State revenue assumptions. I'm basically expecting flat state revenue, and it's called evidence-based funding. And this is for state revenue, this is unrestricted aid. So this is money we get from the state with more or less no strings attached. And it's built up, used to call it general state aid. And then in 2017, the state, with the support of all of the business and administrative and board organizations, came up with basically a research-based formula that takes into account individual characteristics of your district. I think there are 26 of them. Everything from your special education population to your free and reduced population, English language learners, anything that would create or would require more resources to achieve equity in learning or in instruction. And then it also looks at class sizes and uses research-based optimum class sizes, and it takes all it into consideration and spits out kind of a number that they call adequate funding. And so they try to guarantee that every school district will be funded adequately. And this is the new formula because we are very well funded. We have lots of local resources. We're what they call tier 4 school. And so we get our hold harmless, which is our base funding minimum. And that's essentially the amount of money we were getting before. Now they keep adding more money to the system to try to bring some of the schools that are less well funded up to the level of adequacy. We don't get any of that money, but we just kind of continue on getting our base funding minimum. So the nice thing is it's very reliable. State aid used to be prorated every year and we could never count on how much we were going to get. So even though we're not getting more state funding, we're getting a lot more predictable state funding. Transportation aid is what they call restricted funding, and that's essentially a reimbursement for buses. And because our transportation costs were so low this year because we weren't providing a lot of busing, the reimbursement from this year's expenses is also a lot lower. So I'm not expecting a lot of transportation aid next year. CPPRT, I'm not going to go into, but that's it's a corporate tax that we receive, and I'm holding that flat. It's a small amount. And then we still have about $370,000 of COVID relief money available to us. Some of it has already been spent this year, but has not been reimbursed yet. We need to apply for this money. And if you recall, when we talked about staffing, we're funding 2 positions next year out of this money. One of them is a social emotional resource for students and staff, and the other is a math teaching resource to try to address any learning loss that may have occurred during the pandemic. We've talked a lot about salaries recently. So just to recap, the average increase for the LBTC and the teacher contract is 3%. The classified staff or the non-licensed staff, the board approved 3%, and admin increases are also 3%. We're increasing our certified staffing level by 2.2 FTE. I just talked about those two that were funded, grant funded, and then we have a 0.8 psychologist, I believe, who's retiring, and we're replacing with a 1.0. We have a pretty low staff turnover, only one licensed retirement. And then we had a very good year for insurance. Our insurance rates are going down. We're about 1.5%. So I'm looking at some insurance premium savings. And then looking at our purchase services, our outsourced services.
Jay, sorry to interrupt. I just want to comment on the insurance.
Sure.
That never happens. Just so they know, that's an anomaly, right? That they're going down.
Yeah, I mean, our trend has been pretty good.
But not negative.
Does a really good job, but medical trend is like 5% and prescription trend is 10 or 11. So to have a combined decrease like that is, we had a really good year.
Yeah.
Yep. And so our purchase services, RJB, is our night custodial crew. Our day crew is our staff members, but then we outsource the night cleaning crew, and their contract is tied to CPI. This December, the CPI was 1.4%, so we'll see an increase of that next year. The Olson Transportation contract, again, the rate is going up 5%, and we're going back to 10 or 11 routes. We were at six or seven routes this year, due to the lack of busing. Like we didn't want to crowd the buses, so many people drove, and we put space kids out on the buses, and we were able to cut back. We didn't need as many buses because we didn't feel like at the beginning of the pandemic that was the safest thing to do, to put kids on the bus. Next year, we're looking at, as Dr. Leali said, at a more normal year. We'll get back to our normal level of routes. And then we are also increasing our special education teaching staff by 1.0, and this person will be outsourced to our special education cooperative. And that's just based on IEPs and needs for support next year. And that was also discussed during the staffing discussion. Other expenditure assumptions, capital spending. I'm looking at replacing our access control system. That's kind of the fob system that lets people into the building. It's very, very old, and it's running on an old Windows server that is not even been updated. So it's been isolated for security purposes, and that really needs an overhaul. And we've got a very slick new system we're looking at. We have some work to do on the elementary school boiler, and then Steve has requested some new snow removal and grounds maintenance equipment. And just a word on this, we used to outsource all of our snow removal, and when we brought it in-house, we saved a significant amount of money. Our guys do an outstanding job with the snow and all the grounds maintenance, and they need some new equipment. So we're looking at providing that as well next year. Technology, we already talked about the wireless infrastructure upgrade, and then we're also looking to replace a lot of the projectors at the elementary school. Classroom projectors are very old, and we're looking to replace as many of those this summer as we can. And then in terms of outplaced special education, we try to provide for education for our special education students within our district if we can. And if there are needs that can't be met, we are part of a cooperative. Mark's talked about it. He sits on the board of the NSSED, or True North now, Special Education Cooperative. And I'm expecting our placements in our outplacements to that to be flat for next year. And that's also a significant budgetary impact, the number of outplacements. And so that was all I had. If there are any questions.
And Jay, how do you expect, can you educate the board a little bit on how does that evolve over time as you put together your more advanced budgets? You know, do those numbers, are those numbers static, or where, how do you put that together from this point forward?
we're always trying to present a balanced budget, meaning that we're living within our means, our expenditures are less than our revenues or equal to our revenues. It usually evolves a little bit over time. So first cut, really the reason why we didn't do it earlier is because it's very dependent on staffing. If you recall, in some of the education that we did, most of our costs, about 80% of our costs are salaries and benefits. So staffing is the biggest component to our budget. So now that we know our staffing levels and what our insurance costs, I can build a really pretty accurate budget for next year. And then between now and September, we just refine it as we learn new things. We get better estimates on revenue, or I work with the buildings, basically the budget people who own their budgets. So like the building administrators, principals, the superintendent budget and the board budget, and we just go through and talk about what our needs are and refine those over time. But so it doesn't change a whole lot between the draft and the final. But if there are things, last year it changed a lot. A lot of stuff happened between May and September last year. This year, I'm hoping that we'll be pretty consistent.
If I could hop in really quick, I just want to say I appreciate and want the board to know and appreciate that Jay has an eye not only on the finances but also on the ed side, and so always kind of thinking both sides of what's the best bang for our buck, where does this fit in, and how important is it for kids, and what do our staff need, and so always kind of asking the question to make sure we stay within the parameters, but also listening and learning. And I think that's a great strength that we have here, that we are very fiscally responsible, but it's really about what's best for kids and making sure that our teachers and kids have what they need. So,
yeah, thank you. That's like when Nate came to me with the MAC proposal, I just about fell out of my chair because I wasn't expecting $43,000. What are you, crazy? And then he convinced me, like, kids need it and it's a really, good spend. So I'll look for find a spot for it on the budget.
So we always ask how this affects kids and what's right for kids. So that's great. And I also want to point out that historically, I don't know, Jay, you've been here 6 years, 7 years, something like that.
7.
Yeah. He budgets very conservatively, and miraculously, when we review actual versus budgeted every year, we are inevitably within, a very small margin. So I think we can all have a lot of faith in his approach to this, and expect good things going forward, as well as everything we've seen in the past. So thank you.
Thanks.
Any questions for Mr. Khan? All right. So Jay, you have one more thing to continue talking about.
Yes, one more thing,
Quest
just the
food
last
service.
one. So I didn't bring this. I think I spoke at the last meeting in my report, and just let you know that the federal government, the USDA, had approved an extension of the free meal service for next year. Didn't know a lot about it at the time, and I'm still haven't really learned any more about it. It's a different program than the one we have now. And prior to that happening, I spoke with Quest because we were trying to figure out what to do for food service next year. We had a mixed experience with them so far. It was great that we had them during the pandemic. And so I worked with Quest and basically put together this agreement, which I had not brought previously, but I decided that I think we should approve it now for next year. And the nice thing about the agreement is that our current agreement is set up so that Quest gets a management fee, a flat dollar amount, and we hold all the expenses and revenue. And so basically the onus is all on us. If the program doesn't do well, we just get whatever profit or losses there are. We do feed all of our free reduced kids, and this is the most efficient way to feed them, because if we were to go out and purchase meals at a fixed cost, it will cost significantly more than this agreement would cost. So, excuse me, I'll be
nearby. Is that what's happening?
That's what it sounded like.
I think it's a cat. Sometimes the cat makes an appearance.
Oh, really?
I'm sorry, my cat was meowing, it was distracting me, and I'm gonna start over. Okay. Quest Food Service Agreement. So I'm bringing you this Quest Food Service Agreement because I would like to continue to use Quest next year. And I'm not confident that we will be able to take advantage or want to take advantage of the federal program. Let me talk about that first. The federal program is a different one than we're using this year. It may come with significant amount of restrictions and administrative work and costs. I'm still working with ISB and with Quest to see if there's a possibility to use this program. But in addition, it would also have a lot of nutritional requirements. So what that means is the food may not taste as good. It might be smaller portions. It might be similar to some of the food we're getting now because we're under federal restrictions on basically what we can serve. If we were to have our regular food service, Quest has a lot more freedom to make food that kids like. It's more palatable. There's different calorie and nutritional requirements and can offer different options. So if we do,
Sorry to interrupt. Are you
Sure.
saying it could be better than it is right now while
Yeah,
we're
I'm
still
saying-
using Quest?
correct. I'm
Okay.
saying that in the future, if it was an open program and they could serve whatever they wanted, I think the food quality would improve significantly. I also think if we were to use this other federal program, it could actually go the other way because the nutritional requirements may be more stringent than they are today, but I'm still researching that. Our current agreement, we hold all the costs and all the expenditures. And in our experience to date, we've lost a significant amount of money because we're basically paying, we've got a lot of very high fixed costs. When Quest provides our food, we have the staff to make the food, we have the staff to serve the food, we have the trucks to bring it over from Lake Forest. So there's a lot of people involved in the process. And if our volume is low, meaning if people don't like the food and don't buy it, then we don't have enough revenue to support all those fixed costs. And that can swing the loss to be pretty large. So the nice thing about this agreement is that it caps our losses at $60,000, which is less than it would cost me to go out and buy meals for all of our free and reduced kids for the year. So I have a fixed amount that I can, that's guaranteed. So I can budget it easily because I know I can't lose more than a certain amount. I know basically what it's going to cost to feed my free and reduced kids. And there's a lot of upside because Quest now is an incentive to market, to provide good food, to provide lots of different options and really sell kids on the food and hopefully drive enough revenue to, make it break even, make it $30,000 instead of 60. I mean, I expect to spend some money because I'm buying food for about 112 kids every day. But this agreement really takes the risk out of it for us and it gives Quest some skin in the game. I also think there's an opportunity for improved food quality. And if we did want to take advantage of the federal program, we could not do that on our own. We would need a food service company like Quest who has the staff and the nutritionists and the knowledge to run the program with all the regulations that are involved. So that's why I'm bringing this in May at the May meeting for approval. This is a contract that was approved by our attorneys. Our attorneys wrote it, and the Lake Forest attorneys also approved it because we have a contract through Lake Forest. Actually, we contract with Lake Forest to provide the food from Quest. So everybody has been in the loop, and we've talked to everybody about it and had everyone look at the contract and approve it. I'm
So
sorry,
Lake
Lauren.
Forest, so Lake Forest is also on it as well. I just was concerned if they said no, since we don't have the kitchen,
So
capacity.
Lake Forest, the agreement that we have is with Lake Forest, and it is simply to provide food to Lake Bluff through Quest. So we can operate independent programs. We don't have to do the same program that they're doing. And the contract is written such that if they were to not go with Quest, if they were to break their contract with Quest and contract with somebody else, then our intergovernmental agreement would also be void. So we could have another one with whoever their new provider is, or we could go out and look for somebody else. But we're not required to do the same program that they do.
Jay, did you say that this new agreement with Quest for next year that you're proposing, that it caps losses that, and that those losses are less than what it would cost you to buy free and reduced kids lunch for the year?
Correct. Yes, we've looked at like a kiddos model where we would go out and have somebody bring in for a fixed price a meal for the students. And that in that model, we would need to purchase meals for each of the free and reduced kids every day. And that would, I think that would cost close to $100,000. You know, I want to say $85,000 to $100,000 depending. And so this guarantees that I will be spending less than that. I think the food quality will improve as well.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Khan on the food service? All right, Jay, is this you as well, the annual business approval update?
Yeah, and all I'm going to say about that is that I just wanted to prepare people. We will bring this next business meeting or next meeting in May at the end of the month, where we will ask for approval for our workers' comp property casualty insurance. Every year, the board by policy approves our annual banking depositories. They also approve our hazardous bus routes, which is simply just outlines which routes are too hazardous to walk, and there's some reimbursement component for that. And then there's a surety bond, so the board also buys insurance, basically fraud insurance, so that they don't, if there were to be a theft or money stolen, this insurance would cover it. And so I don't have all the data I don't have the policies yet for a lot of these things, but we'll be bringing them. I just wanted to prepare you you'll see them in your packet at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. These are all pretty standard. We do these every year.
We do these every year.
Not very involved. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Khan since he's done 80% of this meeting? Thank you, Jay. We appreciate it. Thorough as usual.
Thank you, Jay.
Unless anything else from the superintendent or any other board members, I'm going to ask for public comment. I don't see any hands raised at the moment. Shelley, can you check if there's any written comment for us that has come in?
None at this time.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any hands raised. Any public comment from the board? Not hearing any. Thank you very much for all your hard work and preparation. And may I have a motion to adjourn at 8:48 p.m.
So moved.
There's a second. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mark Barry,
Yes.
Andy Duran.
Yes.
Ann Hill, yes. Amy Connell Donahue,
Yes.
Lauren Hirsch.
Yes.
Tim Penich.
Yes.
Carrie Steinbach.
Carrie.
You're muted.
Yes.
All
I
right.
said yes
So
1,000 times. All right.
all right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.